Ever since Warner Brothers fired Zack Snyder and brought in James Gunn to replace him, there's been a lot of fans of the Snyderverse hoping that it would come back in some way, shape, or form. And in the past, there has been some things that kind of reinvigorated that hope in them, like the release of the Snyder Cut, thinking because that was successful that Warner Brothers might have learned their lesson and bring back Zack Snyder. But turns out that hasn't been the case after all. But it's looking like there might be some news coming out that even though the chances are pretty slim, there is a possibility that Zack Snyder might actually come back to DC. But before we get into all that, if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you can, leave a comment and hit the like button because it helps out the channel. Zack Snyder's Justice League revival possible. Netflix candidate to buy DC. So yeah, I mean, that would be a pretty big deal if Netflix buys DC from or buys Warner Brothers with DC attached to it. Then it's a possibility that the leadership at Netflix might look for someone else to take over for DC. And since they have a pretty good working relationship with Zack Snyder right now, he would probably be a good candidate for that. Long live the king. Zack Snyder's Justice League universe could make a comeback if Netflix ends up buying Warner Brothers and with it DC Studios. That's the possible speculation following a report from Variety citing Wells Fargo media analyst Stephen Cahill, who identified the soon-to-be standalone Warner Brothers as a prime acquisition target. Prior to the news of a potential Skydance Paramount bid for Warner Brothers, analyst Steve Cahill, I think that's how it's pronounced, named Netflix the most compelling buyer, ranking it ahead of Amazon, Apple, Comcast, Sony, and Paramount Skydance. So that would be something if Netflix actually buys Warner Brothers and in turn has their own choice on who they want to have in charge of it. Now, I just want to reiterate, this is a long shot for them not only to buy it, but then also decide to make their own DC Universe movies, or at least continuing on with the Snyderverse movies, and then also allowing Zack Snyder to be in charge of it, because there's a possibility that even if Netflix does buy it, they might just leave James Gunn in charge of it to continue to do what he's doing instead of actually bringing in Zack Snyder and kind of, I don't know. I want to know if they would necessarily retcon what James Gunn has done, or which is only just a couple things. I believe it's just Peacemaker and Creature Commandos and then Superman. So that's pretty much it. So there is a lot of ifs to be had here, but the chances of Zack Snyder coming back to direct DC projects is not zero anymore. Netflix eyed as top buyer for Warner Brothers. The report arrives as the entertainment industry braces for massive shifts, which are thought to involve tech companies scooping up film studios at bargain basement prices. Rumors have also said Apple has been interested in Disney, and that's something that's been going on for years at this point. And Skydance is essentially a tech company as a result of Oracle. Netflix can be looked as a tech company. Comcast owns Universal. Warner Brothers Discovery is planning to split in 2026 into two separate entities. Warner Brothers, which hold the studios HBO, DC, etc., and Discovery Global, which will retain the cable and network assets. Now, I do think this is kind of interesting, and it's something to look at when it comes to this sort of deal, because if Netflix does buy Warner Brothers, they would also own HBO, so presumably HBO Max, another streaming service, which we don't know what would happen if that was the case, whether they would absorb HBO and all that stuff into Netflix, or would they allow two separate entities to exist, which HBO Max having a certain set of programs, Netflix also having another set of programs. And if that was the case, then that could also play into what could be the potential for having Zack Snyder come back to directing DC projects. That split was confirmed by CEO David Zaslav and lined up with what analysts say makes Warner Brothers much more attractive for acquisition, especially by a content-hungry giant like Netflix. For fans of Snyder's DC films, Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Zack Snyder's Justice League, the Netflix scenario opens the door to possibilities that once seemed closed. And then it's talking about Zack Snyder's relationship working with Netflix, with Army of the Dead, Rebel Moon, Twilight of the Gods. He's also working on a police drama project for the streamer. A potential acquisition would put his past and present under the same roof, and with it, the keys to DC. So again, there's a lot of ifs to be had with this. We don't know what would this look like. And this article kind of speculates on the possibilities at play here. And one of them talking about it is not necessarily picking one side or the other. And this kind of coincides with what I was saying about allowing Netflix and HBO to exist as their own entities. It's possible if Netflix does do this, they're like, we don't want to start another rivalry because that's kind of going on right now between James Gunn fans and Zack Snyder fans. So if Netflix does buy Warner Brothers, decides to scrap James Gunn stuff and put Zack Snyder in charge, well, then that would already alienate a portion of the audience. But Netflix might be one of those companies that is going to try to have their cake and eat it too. And what I mean by that is basically let both universe exist simultaneously. You have Netflix that can have the Snyderverse stuff in there, so he can continue to make movies on there and it can go towards Netflix. James Gunn can continue to do stuff for DC and that lives on HBO. They're both part of DC, but they're also seen as separate entities. Both series feel very different from each other. I mean, there's some of that crossover early on with them, but still, I mean, you could treat them as if they're their own entities, and they can actually even release them theatrically if they want, put them on their own streaming platforms, but they can basically cater to both segments of the audience. And honestly, I think that would probably be the smartest thing to do if they're going to do anything with that. But I mean, if they're not going to do any of that, I think the best solution would probably be just to kind of leave it how it is. James Gunn's already in charge. Hasn't really had an opportunity to show what he wants to do with it. So give him more of an opportunity. But I don't know if besides all that, though, I think probably the smartest thing would be to put aside superhero movies for the time being. Just let it breathe a little bit, because audiences have shown that they're kind of growing tired of superhero movies, even ones that are decently well received. So maybe just let them sit on the shelf for a while instead of trying to chase trends from 10, 15 years ago and basically just cram full of superhero movies, because we've seen that that's not really profitable for a lot of other studios. They're trying to tone down how many or at least they're claiming that they're trying to reduce how many that they're putting out in recent years. At least Disney has been saying that. And if Netflix buys Warner Brothers, I don't think it's a smart move for them just to further increase the volume of superhero movies that they're going to be releasing. I think the best solution would be to try to reduce that number instead of maybe if they wanted to have both of them live simultaneously, you have a gap between them as opposed to just basically doubling the output of superhero movies within DC. But let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Do you think there's a possibility that Zack Snyder will ever get a chance to direct a DC movie, at least in the near future, especially as a result of this potential deal? Or do you think this is just kind of false hope because it's never going to happen? Or do you not care one way or the other? I'm interested in what people have to say about this. Also, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click the like button and share the video out there because it helps out with the channel. Thank you.